Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do my final in a series of videos I'm doing calling my Decade in Reading series, talking about various books that I've read in the teens or the tens. Back in December, I was following, booktube tagging trends where people were talking about the longest books they read in the decade. And I decided, because the end of year stats on that, cool funky page that GoodReads makes us, tracks longest books and other things, that I'd make a couple of videos. So I'll link down below. I made two other videos talking about my longest and shortest books that I read, and also the most and least read books. And then this one, the final one, will be about the most popular books according to GoodReads that I've read in this decade. And it really goes to show that it helps to, I guess, either have a big fandom or very few readers. In one case, just one reader. I'll be popping graphics up above for the 10 books I'll talk about. That'll be the shortest amount too. The other two videos I've had 20 books to talk about, so hopefully this will be a snappier video. I think technically the better term, I should say, more than popular, is highest rated. So anyway, here I go. In 2010, the highest rated book I've read is Good Omens. And this is a book where I think I disagree with a lot of the hype around it. I read this because my college roommate foisted it on me. She loves this book. She loves the humor. I know a lot of people, certainly a lot of BookTube SFF, probably feel the same about this humorous take on God and the devil, but it just didn't do much for me. I worry maybe it's because I take myself too seriously, but I just think maybe the humor isn't my particular brand. In 2011, the highest rated book I've read was A Storm of Swords, which I think in a way is interesting in and of itself because it's the third book in A Song of Ice and Fire rather than the first. I don't know, I'm not sure if it's, actually I think, to be fair, I think in most series the last book is usually the most popular, I guess, because it's, the people who stick with the series really like it. And that being said, A Storm of Swords is not the last book so far that's published, but there's a bit of a divide, I think, in A Song of Ice and Fire readers when it comes to the last two published books, which are a lot more decentralized, and we're only following half of the characters at a time, and there's a lot of random noob characters to also be following. A Storm of Swords sort of feels like the last in a trilogy. It's a little more centralized, and also it has the red wedding in it, and also the purple wedding in it, where Joffrey dies, so there's a lot of sort of huge upsets on the political scene. So I think that's why it's as popular. For me, I don't necessarily care about each book as specifically, I think, as other people do. I'm mostly invested just in seeing it as a big whole, and I'm following stories and of the characters, and some of them are more interesting to me than others. In 2012, the highest read book I've read is New Lines from the Old Line State. This is an anthology that I'm sure I talked about in another one of these videos. It was put out by the Maryland Writers Association some years ago, long before I actually joined the organization, and it's short stories by members about the state of Maryland. I think one of the people published in it was my old biology professor, and I remember sitting in a special reading room and reading this book. Couldn't take it out because it's a special collection, but it was a lot of fun to do that. In 2013, the highest book I've read is called A Girl Who Was on Fire, or The Girl Who Was on Fire, and this is a collection of Hunger Games essays, which I believe I also talked about in another video, which I guess I'm a little surprised by how popular these were. I mean, I think they were okay, but they weren't uniformly great, certainly. But I guess such is the way of fandom when I didn't know they'd reserve this sort of ardor for random essays by fans, but I guess maybe that's the nice thing in a way about YA fandom. They support one another like this, so glad to see it. In 2014, the highest rated book I read is called Minerva Rising Literary Journal, which is particularly the fourth edition, which is called Mothers. I'm the only one who rated this book, and that's in part because, well, especially because my first short story published as an adult skydiving is in it. So, yes, I think you should go and check it out. In 2015, the most popular book I read, or the highest rated book I've read, is The Martian, which I guess had good returns. I mean, I know it was popular in the day, but I guess it's maintained that popularity throughout the years. And of course, it had the Matt Damon movie, which probably helped bring even more readers to the table. So, I mean, this was certainly a tale of rags to riches, I think, especially since it started out as a self-published book and then to make it so big and to get traditionally published and all of that. I mean, I don't think it's all that special necessarily, although I think it was pretty impressive in how scientifically acute it was. Maybe there were a few things that might have been wrong with it, but for the most part it was seemed pretty accurate, and you know, everybody loves a survival story, I think, especially when the character's basically begging to be Matt Damon. So, you know, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's that, you know, personally that impressive, but I can see the appeal. In 2016, the highest rated book I read was Bewilderments, Reflections on the Book of Numbers, which I think might prove the point that the more academic a book is, the more impressed the readers are by it, maybe. So far I haven't had any more nonfiction on here other than that, and this one is more in the philosophical bent, I suppose, in religious studies. I was really impressed. I really liked it. You know, the Book of Numbers is largely known as being the book of counting, of, you know, taking down stats. This tribe has this many goats and oxen and this many sheep, and that sort of thing. Although there are some thorough lines of a real story in there. And the thing that I remember the most is the author talking about Miriam and her role as a prophet in the Bible. So I like that. I have it on my shelves. Maybe I should give it a reread. In 2017, the highest rated book I read was called A Basket of Apples. This was by a Canadian Jewish short story writer. I think basically this is a collection of stories by a forgotten writer, I think, brought to the fore. I'm sure I found it through the Jewish Book Council. And I also remember that I read it, it was the first book I really read after my cat Leia died, and I think short stories were pretty helpful for me at that time to, you know, not have to focus on a sweeping narrative, but, you know, in and out. That being said, I'm on record for saying that I'm uncomfortable with how little I remember most short stories. I do think this one stuck with me at the time, though, and I appreciated it because of the circumstances, and I liked these stories. In 2018, the highest rated book I read is Obsidian, which is, proving my point, the last in a YA trilogy, a science fiction trilogy. For me, this was the weakest book in the bunch. It's a part of a series that's really just pure fun escapism, you know, badass heroines being badass in a, you know, dystopian world where, you know, they get to save the day from the evil corporate overlords. I mean, it was clever in a lot of parts, but it was never really meant to be taken seriously, and I'm not sure it was ever really meant to end. I mean, even though there was a structure overall of all the action taking place at a trial after everything had happened, when it comes down to the actual story about the badass teenagers being badass, you know, it's not really something that's supposed to wrap up, and certainly not something, again, that's supposed to be taken seriously, which is what the final book kind of tried to do. So I think this one disappointed me the most out of the three. I mean, overall I read them all because I really enjoyed them, so, you know, they didn't really disappoint me. And I actually listened to them on audiobook because it was read by a full cast, and there was a lot of amazing sound effects. They really kind of brought in the show for this one. It was like, you know, an old-timey radio show. I think other people really enjoyed reading the books because it was presented in found document style, kind of like a graphic novel in a way, but even more original or unique than most graphic novels in a way. So yeah, that's my experience with the books. And finally, in 2019, the highest rated book I read is A Return to Nonfiction. It's On Middle Ground. This is a book of scholarship of history on American Jews, well, Jews in Baltimore, to be more specific. And I was impressed by this one. I think it got the point across in pretty good language. I think, like all literature written in part by historians, or all by historians, it can get a little redundant at times, but for the most part, I think they tied together some good stories of people to follow through interviews and archival stuff. I think it did away with one of the author's faults in one of his earlier books about trying to pretend that every decade was hugely different, or that's what I remember from reading it, like he was trying to make things sound more distinct than they were, and I think in this book they followed the trends more genuinely, about how things ebb and flow through time. And it was a fascinating little microcosm, really, to track how the Jews of Baltimore had a similar and also a different experience from other Jews throughout American history. Maryland is situated in an interesting place. We're a port city, so that has helped us out sometimes. And also, especially, we're sort of situated in the middle of the East Coast, so, not quite northern, not quite southern, so Baltimore has some conservative elements and also some northern urban sort of makeup to it as well, so it's been an interesting ride in terms of economics and also social relationships. Like one thing the authors posit is that Jews and blacks interacted more in this city than many others. So yeah, if American social history is your bag, then I would suggest this one. So that about covers it for me now. I will leave links to all of my reviews for these 10 books down below. And this wraps up my decade in reading project. Thank you so much for sticking with me. But the other day I was listening to Olive at a Book Olive talk about her favorite books for the past 5 years and ranking them, and I thought, hey, that might be fun for me to do as well. So I think I'll be hopping on that bandwagon in February, so stay tuned. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.